DAF Dalet Amud Aleph. It's about 10 lines down. Haisa Gavoa Me Esrim Amma. Remember, according to the Chachamim, the sukkah is puzzle if it's higher than 20 amas. So we had learned yesterday that a person could theoretically raise the floor in order to mitigate that problem. So you have this issue that the sukkah is higher than 20 amos. So we'll see first, V'hutzin Yordin B'so Chafama. Now, in the Middle East, the SUKKAH is not like the modern SUKKAH that we have, you just put a mat up. The SUKKAH is usually palm branches, just like in Southern California, right? And so when you have foliage that is your SUKKAH, you have leaves protruding downwards, you have foliage protruding upwards. Let's say the sukkah is exactly 20 amos high, and your foliage is protruding downwards so that some of the foliage is dipping below the 20 amma mark. Is that a kosher sukkah or not? So the question, the issue is this: Imtzilasam ruba mechamasam ksheira vimlav psula. The answer is that if you have enough foliage such that you were to cause to disappear all of this foliage that is above that is at the 20 amma mark or above, and just look at that slice of foliage that's below 20 amas, and you have more shade than sunlight from that foliage, so then it's a kosher sukkah, because you have SUKKAH that's below 20 amas, that's kosher. But if not, by eliminating the stuff that's above 20 amas, you don't have enough shade, so then it's possible. Now, conversely, so that if you have a sukkah that's now the minimal height, which we said is 10 tfachim high, let's say you have some foliage dipping into the sukkah, and so that could create a problem, right? So savar Abaya lemeimar im chamasa meruba mitzilasam kshera. Abaya wanted to suggest the converse. He said, look, just like by the sukkah that's 20 amos high, as long as you've got a lot of SUKKAH dipping down, it's kosher. So we should say the converse. If you've got just a little bit of SUKKAH dipping down into the Yudvachim, such that it's not enough, that small amount of SUKKAH is not enough to provide shade, so then that's not going to create a problem with your sukkah, and it's still a kosher sukkah. But Amalei Rava, no. Ha dira sruchi ve'en adam dar b'dira sruchi. He says, no, there's another chisaron, there's another deficiency in that situation, in that your sukkah becomes a stinky, not nice sukkah. Dira srucha literally means a stinky domicile, a stinky residence. It's not a place where you'd want to live. And because, you got this stuff coming down right into your face, even if it's not kosher or SUKKAH, it's still not pleasant, and therefore it's not called a residential area. So therefore, even if there's less than a shady SUKKAH that's dipping down into the 10 tfachim, Rabbi says it's still possible. So now we're going back to our discussion about raising the floor. But here we have special cases. Now remember, we talked about raising the floor with earth yesterday, with other items, and if you can raise the floor legitimately by putting down a higher floor, so then you've solved the problem. But now we're going to talk about putting in a platform on the floor of the sukkah that doesn't cover the entire floor space of the sukkah. Haisa gavoa me esrim ama ubana ba itztaba keneged doifen ha'imtzai al pnei kula. So v'yesh ba hechsher sukkah keshera. So if I think you all have a diagram in your Gemara. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are actually two diagrams. One is marked itztaba be'emtza, and the other one is itztaba min hatzad. The word itztaba means a platform, like a wooden platform. And by installing this platform, you've raised the floor effectively such that there's less than 20 amos distance between the floor you're standing on and the ceiling. The only thing is that this platform does not cover the entire floor of the sukkah. What you do is you position it, now assuming we have a sukkah that's 3 walls, because that's the minimum that you need for a sukkah to be kosher. So we have a 3-wall sukkah in the shape of a square U, okay? If you position the platform all the way to the back, the middle wall, so then, which is what the diagram number 1, the first diagram on your page indicates, that shaded area is the platform, and the platform is sufficiently wide such that it connects with the 2 side walls as well, and assuming that the platform is a minimum of 7 tfachim wide, which is the shear that you need for a sukkah, so then you've got a kosher sukkah on the platform, because it's bounded by 3 sides, by 3 walls, and it's less than 20 amos up to the ceiling.
So this is like a bird's eye view.
That's right. That's a bird's eye view. That's an aerial view, exactly. Now Rashi takes it even one step further, and he says that even when you step off the platform towards the entrance to the sukkah, you're still in a kosher sukkah. The reason why Rashi says this is because we'll learn later on that there's a Gemara that states that if you have schach protruding from a kosher sukkah, that even the area underneath that schach, even though it's not bounded by walls, is kosher because it's viewed as an extension of a kosher sukkah. I don't know that we paskin this way. This was a chiddush to me when I saw it. I don't remember this, unfortunately, but I don't know if we paskin this way. But certainly the area that's on the platform is a kosher sukkah, and according to Rashi, even the area beyond the platform that has schach that's higher than 20 amos over it is still going to be kosher. Okay, now umin hatzad im yesh misvas itzta b'lekoisel dalad amos psula pachos me'arba amos kashera. So now we go to diagram number 2. You've decided to position your platform differently. Instead of positioning it as a rectangle where the width goes from one end of the sukkah to the other, you've positioned it going down lengthwise, and you've put it such that the narrow part is against the back wall, against that middle wall, and the length of it is against the right side, the right wall. Do you see that in the diagram? Yeah. Here's the problem. The problem is that now this platform is only bounded by 2 walls. It's not bounded by 3 walls. But not all is lost, because even though you only have 2 walls surrounding the platform, you have to take a look. Is the space between the left edge of the platform to the left wall, is it more than Dalet Amos or is it less than Dalet Amos? 4 Amos. If it's more than Dalet Amos, you do not have a kosher sukkah. Sorry, you're out of luck. But if it's less than Dalet Amos, that will be a kosher sukkah. Now, why is that? So there's a principle called Dofen Akuma, which we're going to learn a lot about in Maseches Sukkah. Dofen Akuma is the principle that is a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Don't ask me to explain to you where we know it from. It's an oral tradition. And it states as follows. If you have a vertical wall and your schach is positioned here, and it's not up flush against the wall, then if you have solid mass that is vertical, which is not kosher schach, let's say a portion of ceiling over here, then as long as it's less than 4 amos distance from the kosher schach to the wall, we view this ceiling portion as a bent wall. In other words, you sort of have to imagine it as shifting it upwards 90 degrees and viewing it as an extension of the wall, and therefore you have a kosher sukkah. You have a kosher sukkah even though the schach does not extend all the way to the wall. That's the principle of Dofen Akuma. Now, in this example, it's really essentially the same thing. Instead of a ceiling, you have non-kosher schach, because from the edge of the platform to the left wall, what you essentially have is schach that's higher than 20 amos from the floor. So it's essentially non-kosher ceiling. As long as there's less than 4 amos from the kosher schach that's above the platform to the wall, you view it as a dofen akuma, and the entire sukkah therefore is kosher because you now have 3 walls bounding your platform, so to speak.
If you have a space instead of
if it's airspace, excellent, Bob. If it's airspace, we do not apply the principle of dofen akuma. You only apply it when you have a solid mass. Okay, then you say the wall is bent and it extends to the schach.
And the schach is the solid mass? Is that what we're saying is the solid mass? The schach that's...
You mean the non-kosher schach?
Yeah.
The schach that's higher than 20 amos is like a ceiling.
There's no platform there, so it's higher.
Right, that's right, exactly.
Translation of Dofen Akuma?
A bent wall.
Oh, bent wall.
Okay? So that's the principle. And that, by the way, is the reason why a lot of people, you can make a sukkah, for example, in my in-laws' house, they have a room that they added on to their house years ago, and they put a bubble over it. So they just, when they want to have sukkah, make a sukkah, they just lift up the bubble and they put the schach on. Now, from an engineering standpoint, you can't have a building that has just complete ceiling that doesn't have, you have to have a little bit of ceiling protruding in. So yes, there's a bit of a ceiling, right? That's sort of the border, right? And then it's a big square in the middle, right? But since there's less than Dalet Amos of ceiling on all sides, then they lift the bubble and they put on this stuff.
Under that ceiling part?
So that's the question. Right. It seems like yes, you are allowed to. Even to that extent, you're allowed to. It's a doifen akuma, but that's something that I have to research more in the halacha. But it's a machaya because in Southern California, you can put an air conditioner in your sukkah. So even when it's 100 degrees outside, it's a machaya. And I guess in Toronto too. Yeah, sure. You can put a heater. Put a heater in the sukkah.
What about what we learned yesterday? I was thinking about that with houses like that. But what about what we learned yesterday that there's a chashash that maybe he'll step out of the sukkah, that he'll be too far out in the shulchan?
Yeah, but you're considered in the sukkah.
The whole thing is.
The whole thing is considered part of your sukkah. As to whether you can sit under the doifen akuma when you're eating, I think it's a discussion in the poskim. But lamaisa, you're in a sukkah. You're in a kosher sukkah. Okay. All right. So frek the Gemara, my kamashmalan. So shkoyach, what are you trying to tell me by telling me the second illustration? So you're telling me something that I already know because they're reading dofen akuma. You're telling me that I apply the principle of dofen akuma tanina. That I already know from a brisa. What do you need? What do I need you to tell me that? Because we have the brisa that says bayish nifchas. If you have a structure where the ceiling caves in, you got to fix a hole where the rain comes in and stops. I forgot the words anymore. Right? Anyway, so bayish nifchas v'sichech al gabab. If you have a house that the roof fell in, and you want to put schach on that hole in order to make it a sukkah, im yesh min hakosa l'sichach dalet amos psula, hapachos mikan keshera. So then the brisa had said that if the remaining ceiling that's still there is wider than dalet amos from the hole to the walls, so then you can't do it. But if it is less than dalet amos from the remnant of the ceiling, that's the border to the wall, then it's kosher. So what did you need to tell me this halacha by the platform? So the Gemara answers, I'll tell you why. Because mahu detema hasam hu dechazya l'doifen aval hacha delo chazya l'doifen emalo kamash malon. Now the Rashi explains that hasam hu over there, just bottom 3 lines in the Gemara. Maybe only over there where I have the roof which caved in. The amrinan dofen akuma mishum de dofen dida chazi ledofen de'ena gavoa mikashir. He says it's very interesting conceptually. In that situation, the side walls of this structure where the roof caved in are less than 20 amos high. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with the vertical part of the wall. It's only that we say that we have to append to the vertical wall additional horizontal mass, and make that horizontal mass, the remnant of the ceiling, part of that vertical wall. Here we're taking it even one step further. Now go to your left wall in the diagram. How high is that wall? That wall is higher than 20 amos. Maybe I wouldn't even apply the rules of dofen akuma when I'm dealing with a wall that is so large that to begin with, when you wanted to add that horizontal stuff, you're already going above a place where the wall is even kosher. So maybe I wouldn't apply dofen akuma over there, and that's the chiddush over here. So therefore, aval hacha delo chazya l'dofen emalo, but over here, where you want to apply that bent wall rule, it's already above 20 amos. Maybe you would say no, kamash malon, and that's the chiddush, that you can apply dofen akuma even when it's that bending is above 20 amos. Let's go weiter. Haisa gavoa michaf ama ubana itztaba be'emtzeisa. Next case, there really should be a third diagram over here, but we're going to let you use your imagination. You've got the same 3 walls, you've got the same platform. Now look at diagram number 1, where you've put the platform all the way flush against the back wall. But in this illustration, the platform is narrower than it is so that it doesn't reach either the left wall or the right wall. Okay, so it's just up against the back wall. So im yesh misvas itztaba v'ladofen arba amos l'chol ruach v'ruach pesula, pachos me arba amos keshera. So then it depends. If there's more than dalet amos on either side from the left side of the platform and the right side of the platform to the walls, then it's not kosher. But if there's less than Dalet Amos on both sides, so then it's kosher. So the Gemara says, "My kamashmal and darmin and doifen akuma hainuhach." What are you telling me that you didn't already illustrate for me in the second case, that we apply the rules of dofen akuma? I'll tell you what's the chiddush. Mahu detema dofen akuma mi ruach echas arminan vol kol ruach v'ruach lo kamash malon. Because the previous illustration was we only apply dofen akuma on one side. Here you have to apply dofen akuma to both sides. You might have thought that we're not so liberal. The chiddush is yes. You can even when all sides of your sukkah have a indented ceiling, and you have to apply dofen akuma to all sides, you're allowed to do that.
Even if it wasn't touching any wall?
Even if it's not touching any wall, in theory, you could still apply the principle of dofen. The shver sukkah. Right. That's right. The shver sukkah. It's a shver sukkah. Okay. Oh, he does. Okay, see, there you go.
With the rubble instead of the color.
Okay. All right, next. Haisa pechusa miyud tfachim. Now let's go to the next case. Your sukkah is now, let's go to the minimal shear. Your sukkah is less than 10 tfachim high, and you want to make it into a kosher sukkah. So instead of raising the walls, you have a chap. I'll just dig a ditch. I'll dig the earth in the ground, so that my sukkah will be partially underground, partially above ground, and the total height will be 10 tfachim from the underground area. So the Gemara says, then it depends. Im yesh misfas chak v'lakoisel gimel tfachim pesula, pachos mishlosha tfachim kishera. There, we're not applying the Dalet Amos anymore, and I'll tell you why. We'll see why in just a second. But here the criterion is the standard Lavud criterion, which is, it's got to be, the ditch has to have a margin of less than 3 tfachim from the edge of the ditch to the wall. If there's any more than 3 tfachim, which is only about a foot, so then it's going to be pasul. So the Gemara's obvious question is, why, when it comes to the height, do we apply dofen akuma, and over here by the floor we don't apply dofen akuma? So Maishna Hasam de Amart Pachos me'arba amos, Maishma Hacha de Amart Pachos mishlosha tfachim. Why are the measurements different? So the Gemara says, Hasam de Isei ledofen Pachos me'arba amos sagya, Hacha l'shavuye ledofen Pachos mishlosha tfachim in ilo lo. So the Gemara gives also another brilliant logical distinction, which really requires like abstract thought in geometry. The idea here is that the walls of the existing sukkah are less than 10 tfachim high. Halachically, that's not even called a wall. Halachically, that's not called a wall. So you can't apply the principle of dofen akuma to a wall that's less than 10 tfachim. And that's the reason why the only way that you can view this wall as extending down underground is if it's within 3 tfachim of the ditch, which digs further down into the ground.
And then the ground becomes wall?
The ground, right? The walls of the ditch are an extension of the wall going downwards. But you can't apply dofen akuma to a wall that doesn't even have 10 tfachim of height. There has to be a minimum height in order for something to be called a dofen, in order for something to be called a wall. Okay. Now another interesting thought experiment. You have a very large sukkah, it's very high. It's over 20 amos high and you want to make it kosher. But you have this great idea. You remember that at your daughter's wedding you had a huge pillar that you put your big flowers on. This pillar is 7 by 7 tfachim and it's over 10 tfachim high. You schlep the pillar into the middle of the sukkah. You're very far from all the walls of the sukkah, but you realize something quite fascinating. If the top of the pillar is a minimal shear of 7 by 7 tfachim, so it's a pretty wide pillar. It's enough 7 tfachim, maybe 28 inches. Okay, so it's a little bit over. It's over a meter by a meter. It's got the minimum shear of floor space of a sukkah. You stand on top of the pillars, so therefore the distance, because the pillar is 10 tfachim high, so the distance between you and the ceiling now is less than 20 amos. So perhaps you could say that I'm standing on an area and I'm bounded by walls. Now the walls, granted, are beneath my feet, but they're nevertheless walls. Now we have a principle called
What do you mean the walls? Which walls?
the walls of the pillar.
Oh.
Now just imagine this for a second. The pillar has walls, right? I'm standing on top of the pillar. The walls of the pillar are beneath me, are beneath my feet. You got
And the
that so
sides
far?
of the pillar?
The sides of the pillar. We're talking about a square pillar. We're not talking about a Roman column. We're talking about a square pillar. The walls of the pillar are under my feet. Now, if you could say a principle called good achis mechitzta, or good asik mechitzta, which means in halacha, we do this in halacha, we say that once you have the beginning of a wall, then the wall continues traveling imaginarily all the way up to Shamayim. So therefore, there's an argument to be made that I'm standing on a kosher sukkah. I'm standing in a kosher sukkah.
A four-walled sukkah?
A four-walled sukkah where the walls are beneath me, but they continue upwards imaginarily, up until the schach. The distance between me and the schach is less than 20 amos, and therefore perhaps this is a kosher sukkah. So, that's what the Gemara wants to say. Savar Abaye Lameimar good asik mechitzta. That's what Abaye wanted to argue. By the way, the principle of good asik mechitzta, that you imagine the walls going up to Shamayim, and once they start, that once the walls go up 10 tfachim, you imagine they go up to Shamayim, is also a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. But Amarle, and we have this halacha regarding Erevin, we have it Hilchas Shabbos, we have it with Tumah, we have it in a number of places. So Amarle Rava, ba'inan mechitzos hanikaros v'leka. Rava says, sorry, it ain't going to work here. You know why? Because you have to take one other factor into account, and that is human perception. If the human who's standing on that platform, on that pillar, does not perceive that he's bounded by walls, because he doesn't really see the walls, he sees other walls, those walls are distant from him, and he's really not cognizant of the walls of the pillar that are beneath him. On an active, he's got to sort of use too much imagination in order to create this scenario, then it's not a kosher sukkah.
That's the whole idea of good asik mechitza. You don't see them, and they still extend.
Well, not really, because good asik mechitzta means that even though the walls I don't see in front of me, but I'm aware that there are walls that are below. In other words, I can see the walls below. I can see where it starts.
Like an object.
Here, it's really very, very difficult to imagine this thing as a wall.
Would it not be any different if the walls
Well,
extended a little
you'll
bit?
see. You'll see. Now I'm going to tell you. Let's wait for other illustrations. Tana Rabbana. Noatz arba'a kundisim. Listen to the following brisa. A guy's on top of his roof. His roof is a structure, flat roof, like in the Middle East, okay? He's got a flat rooftop, and he wants to make a sukkah on top of his roof. He wants to economize on the materials, so instead of putting up walls, he takes 4 posts, and he puts a post, one in each corner of his rooftop. V'sichei chalgabon, and he puts schach on the 4 posts. Rabbi Yaakov machshir v'chachamim poslam. Rabbi Yaakov says that's kosher, the chachamim say that's pasul. Amar Rav Huna machlokes al sfas hagag. So comes along Rav Huna and clarifies this machlokes. He says the only time there's a machlokes is when you're dealing with the posts have been placed at the edge of the rooftop. So they're flush up against the walls of the building. They're extending the walls of the building. The Rabbi Yaakov Savar Amrinan Good Asik Mechitzta V'Rabbanan Savri Lo Amrinan Good Asik Mechitzta. This is the machlokes. The Chachamim say, we don't say good asik. We don't say that you can extend the walls of the building to continue to go upwards where the posts are. And Rabbi Yaakov says that you do say that. Aval be'emtza hagag divrei hakol pesula. But everyone would agree that without the factor of good asik, which means that if you would just place 4 posts in the center of the roof, far away from the edge of the rooftop, everyone would agree, both the Chachamim and Rabbi Yaakov would agree that that's a pasal sukkah, because you need at least 2 walls and a little bit more of a 3rd wall in order for it to be kosher, and all you've got is 4 posts here. But Rav Nachman disagrees with Rav Huna. He says, Omar be'emtza hagag machlokes. He says, no, there is a machlokes. Rabbi Yaakov says, even in a case where you put the posts in the center of the roof, distant from the edge, he will still hold that that's a kosher sukkah. So now Ibayaluhu, let's just clarify Rav Nachman. Be'emsa hagag machlokas of alasfas hagag divrei akol keshera, o dilma bein bezu vein bezu machlokas. Teiku. We're not sure what Rav Nachman means as far as what would happen if you would put the posts at the edge of the rooftop. Would Rav Nachman assert that everyone agrees that that's kosher, even the Chachamim, because they hold of good asik mechitzta? Or would there be a machlokas there as well? between Rabbi Yaakov, who would say that it's kosher, and the Chachamim, who there too would say that it's pasul. The Gemara says we're not sure what Rav Nachman would hold in that case. But now we're going to ask a kasha on Rav Huna. Remember, Rav Huna says that according to everybody, if you put the posts not at the edge of the roof, but in the center of the rooftop, everyone would agree, even Rabbi Yaakov would agree that that's pasul. Take a look. No'atz dalid kundisin ba'aretz v'sichech al gaban Rabbi Yaakov ma'achshir v'chachamim poslim. The Brisa says that if you stick 4 posts into the ground, here you're on the floor, you're in your backyard, and you put 4 posts up in the middle of your backyard and you put schach over them, Rabbi Yaakov says it's a kosher sukkah, and the Chachamim say it's a pasul sukkah. Why Rabbi Yaakov says it's kosher, we're going to discover momentarily. So just hold on to that for a second. But the fact of the matter is, v'ha'eretz d'cha'emtza hagag dami v'kamachsher Rabbi Yaakov. You see that Rabbi Yaakov, even when he's not relying on the principle of good asik, because there are no walls underneath my backyard that I can say, imagine the walls going up. And still Rabbi Yaakov says that's a kosher sukkah. So presumably the same thing would be true if you put the posts on your roof in the center, in the middle of the rooftop. So tiyufta de Rav Huna tiyufta. This is a refutation of Rav Huna, because you clearly see that Rabbi Yaakov holds that the 4 posts are a kosher sukkah, even when you're not relying on good asik. Comes along the Gemara, va'od be'emtzahu de pligi aval asfas hagag divrei akol keshera. The Gemara says, let's go back to that brisa that we just challenged Rav Huna with. Maybe there's an additional challenge to Rav Huna. It seems from that brisa that the only time that there's a machlokus is when you put the 4 posts in the middle of your backyard. It seems like only there do the Chachamim hold that it's not a kosher sukkah. We can infer from that if you applied good asik to that situation, such as you put the 4 posts on the edge of your rooftop, then the Chachamim would agree that it's a kosher sukkah. So let's leimati havi tiyufte de Rav Huna betarti. So let's say that's an additional refutation of Rav Huna, because Rav Huna says the Chachamim hold that that's pasul in that case. Is that an additional refutation? So the Gemara says, Omer lecha Rav Huna pligi be'emtza hagag v'hu adin al sfas hagag. So Rav Huna will tell you, not necessarily so. I know that I've been refuted. I know I've been shot out of the water, right? Because my understanding of Rabbi Yaakov is a mistake. But I still may be correct about the Chachamim. It's still possible that the Chachamim would hold that you never hold that a sukkah with 4 posts is kosher, neither when you have the 4 posts on the ground or in the center of the roof, nor when you have the 4 posts on the edge, because they hold that you don't say good asik in that situation, right? And you cannot. And v'hayda kamiflagi be'emtza hagag lo diach kolcho de Rabbi Yaakov ta'afilu be'emtza hagag no mimachshir. So then, why, you could ask, according to you Chachamim, why did you only argue with Rabbi Yaakov in a case when the posts are on the ground or in the center of the roof? Disagree with him also when they're at the edge of the roof, and point out that you don't hold a good asik mechitzna? The answer is because we want to point out how far Rabbi Yaakov is liberal, to what extent he is lenient, and he holds that you can be machshir a sukkah of 4 posts. But you don't necessarily see that the Chachamim will assent to him when the posts are at the edge of a rooftop. You don't know that. And therefore, Rav Huna will say, don't beat me up too much. You've proven that I'm wrong in far as my interpretation of Rabbi Yaakov, but I still may be correct that the Chachamim will be machmir, both in the case when the posts are in the center or when they're on the edge of the rooftop. Now let's just think conceptually, why is it that you have an opinion of at least Rabbi Yaakov who says that we do say good asik mechitzta when you have the 4 posts, but everyone seems to agree, at least Rava pointed out, that you don't say good asik when you're standing on that pillar in the previous case in the middle of the sukkah. What's the difference between the two?
The roof that extends.
It's the border, it's the edge, the posts are at the edge of the roof, and there we said you do say good asik mechitzta.
I'm saying, do you have a fence on the perimeter of the roof like you're supposed to?
No. You have nothing. You just have a rooftop.
I was hoping that you could see the wall that way.
Because the posts are
but listen to what Mark is saying. He's saying that there are posts there. The posts themselves provide enough of a visual indication.
Or just the poles.
Perhaps. That they remind you that there's walls underneath, and that these posts are sort of like the visual indicator that allow you to perceive better that there are walls coming up imaginarily. That could be conceptually the reason why, even if you don't hold of good asik mechitzta by the case of the pillar, you would hold of good asik mechitzta in the case of the posts that are on the rooftop. Let's go weiter. Tana Rabbana. Let's go back to that brisa. You stick 4 posts in your backyard and you put SUKKAH on them. So Rabbi Yaakov Omer Rowan Kol Sheilu Yechakaku V'Yechalku Yesh Bohem Tefach Lekan V'Tefach Lekan Nidonen Mishum Diyumid V'Im Lav Ein Nidonen Mishum Diyumid. Now this is the crucial point. Why does Rabbi Yaakov say that 4 posts constitute a kosher sukkah? He says as follows: we're dealing with, let's say, circular or spherical posts, okay? Poles. We're dealing with wooden poles, cylindrical poles. Thank you. Okay? And the cylindrical poles have to be such that the diameter is large enough. What's the hypotenuse of a 1x1 triangle? 1.4, something like that. That's
long ago.
All right, but whatever it is, you have to be able to imagine that if you had a boring tool, you could actually carve out from these cylindrical posts an L-shaped post where each side of the L is 1 tefach. That's what we call a diyumid. A diyumid is an L-shaped post. Now, why is an L-shaped post significant? By the way, where did we see L-shaped posts before? Anyone remember?
Well.
Erevin by the well. Very good. That's called Pasei Biraos. And the Gemara had discussed the idea that if you have 4 L-shaped posts surrounding a well in Rishus Harabim, you are allowed to draw the water out to give to your animal to drink. It's a special halacha. Also, I think it was a halacha l'Moshe Misinai, but over there, the diyumid has to be 1 amma by 1 amma. Here, Rabbi Yaakov says you apply the same principle of pasei biros, but you apply it to a sukkah, and all you need is just 1 tefach by 1 tefach in the L-shaped post. And he says that's enough to have a kosher sukkah. And even if the post is currently not L-shaped, but it's cylindrical or square, but you could imagine that you could be bored out, chiseled out the L shape and still have 1 by 1 tefach, it's still a kosher post because of the concept of the yumid. And Shahaya Rabbi Yaakov Omer, diyum de sukkah tefach. Where he gets this from, we're not sure. Maybe we'll see later on. V'chachamim omrim, ad shushtayim ki hilchasan u'shlishas afilu tefach. The Chachamim disagree. You can't be that imaginative with the walls of a sukkah. The walls, you need at least to have 2 full walls and a third partial wall in order for a sukkah to be kosher. Rabbi Yaakov holds, as long as you got the 4 corner posts in the shape of an L, so each L serves as like the beginning of 2 walls, like the north side and the west side, north side and the east side and the south side, west side and the south side. So you've got your all 4 directions covered by like a 1 tefach at the beginning of each wall. So he says that that's enough. Let's go weiter, just a little bit more. V'she'ena gavoa asara tefachim. We also learned in our Mishnah that if the sukkah is less than 10 tefachim height, then it's not a kosher sukkah. Minola. Where do we know this? Where do we know that in order for something to be of significant height, it has to be 10 amos 10 tefachim rather off the ground? So Itmar Rav Rabbi Chanina v'Rabbi Yochanan v'Rav Chaviva Masnu. Bekula Seder Moed Kol Ki Haizuga Chalufe Rabbi Yochanan U'Ma'ili Rabbi Yonasan. And incidentally, the Gemara just says, I know that I've indicated to you that we have Rav and Rabbi Chanina, and we have Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Chaviva. But there are those who learn throughout Seder Moed that whenever you have this pair of Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Chaviva, it's not Rabbi Yochanan, but rather Rabbi Yonasan. But in either event, the rabbi stated as follows: Aron Tisha v'chaporas tefach harei kanasara. We know that in the construction of the Aron Kodesh, which we just read about in last week's parsha, the body of the Aron was 9 tefachim high, and the kapores, the lid, the cover of the Aron was 1 tefach high. Uchesiv v'no adeti l'chasham v'dibarti itecha me'al hakapores. I just spoke about this pasuk in my drasha last Shabbos. It says that I will meet with you there, and I will speak with you from above the ark cover. Now, what do you see from that pasuk? You see that the Shechina only comes down above 10 tefachim. The Shechina only comes down 10 tefachim, and we have this principle, the Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer, Me'olam lo yarda Shechina lamata, v'lo olu Moshe Eliyahu lamara. That we know that there's a principle that Hashem's Shechina never comes down to earth completely. It always stays up in heaven. And Moshe and Eliyahu, as much as they ascend up to Shemayim, never reach the full extent of Shemayim. And so therefore, you see from this concept that Hashem never comes down fully to earth. He comes down to the level that's just above earth. What is that? That's 10 tfachim height. So therefore, if you want to have a structure that extends above the earth, to have a legitimate structure that we can call a roof, a ceiling over the earth, it has to be at least 10 tfachim high. And that's really our source for knowing that the minimal height of a sukkah is 10 tfachim. This is where we'll hold it for today. You'll finish this Gemara tomorrow. Mitzvah Hashem, have a wonderful Shabbat.